So, good morning, Jennifer.
Good
Um,
morning, Stella.
Thank you for agreeing to do this interview and to let people know about the truth of your experience when it comes to having worked with me in this program, New Ways in Chaotic Times, all about reclaiming the power of the Crone. So, I would like to delve into this conversation and it's unscripted. We don't know where it's going to take us, and we know what we're going to talk about. So, what I'm curious about, first of all, I'd like you to just introduce yourself to the listeners, and then, how do you want to be known?
And that changes for me now, moment by moment and day by day. That's all part of the fun of living in a quantum infinite paradigm. My name is Jennifer Hatt. I born and raised in Nova Scotia, where I still live. Never 15 minutes or more from a beach, which is my happy place at the moment. Um, I've been engaged in well systems based conversations now for just over a decade. Large group conversations, one on one experiences, small intensives, uh, a range of programs and conversations that have introduced me not only to some incredibly powerful and awakening women, and an intense body of knowledge that continues to serve me daily. Uh, Most importantly, it's brought me closer to myself. I have a whole new awareness of who I am, not as a flesh and blood body alone, but as a divine being in that body for the human experience. And that, in turn, has reframed everything in my life. And from my perspective, for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even things that have changed, things that, beliefs that I felt were unshakable or essential to my life, uh, and being able to allow revisiting and letting go of some of those. I'm continuing to create a whole new expansive life for myself. And I am continuing to reframe what that means for me. Less and less is it about the tangibles in terms of the money I make or the job I do or the title I hold or the possessions I have. It's more and more about me being able to wake up in the morning, breathe, and go, yes, I have a whole infinite day ahead of me. Um, how do I choose to spend and play in it? And it may look very much like what I used to do 5 and 10 years ago. I'm a writer by trade. So I spent a lot of time here sitting in front of a screen, um, typing words, thinking about words, playing with words, or increasingly engaging in conversations. And some days it looks like I could never have imagined. And it's all about the ease and the flow that I feel of myself within. Um, Fewer and fewer of those stories of, well, for me, that comes up as shame and rage and fear of getting it right or getting it wrong, of am I productive enough? Am I earning my keep? Am I worth the air that I'm breathing? Um, Stories that would have, for me, started probably back when I started school in terms of this is what a good student looks like. This is what a good girl looks like. This is what it means to be a productive member of society. And it's not to say that those things are true or untrue. What I continue to learn in programs like what Stella is introducing here today and other well systems based programs I've engaged with is that there's always more to the story. Most of us, myself especially, were raised in paradigms where we were told just a small part of things because that was convenient. That's the way things were done. That's the way things were always done. It was very much, a society bent on raising and educating your children to be polite, obedient, and productive, but productive for someone else. Um, and gradually, I've been learning that some of that can still serve me, but there is so much more of myself that I have forgotten or that I do not know because it never even occurred to me that there was more. So I guess what I have found in engaging in these conversations, and in particularly talking about the word crone, that word fascinates me because I love to say it. It just crone, it just there's something about it that just sounds so appealing. At the same time, I was one of those who, you're calling me a crone? That's an insult. I'm not some hag with a pointed hat and a big nose and like flying on a broom. Like, how dare you? I don't even have warts. Um, and learning, of course, that crone has a much more powerful and an awesome meaning. Myself as crone is who I've always wanted to be. Um, and how clever of those who perpetuated that myth of the crone as some evil or insane old hag that you just do not want to engage with, do not touch, do not go near her house. um, Very clever for them, very disempowering for me and for others with whom I've engaged in those conversations. So reclaiming that, I am many people within one life, in a sense. I mean, look at the shelf behind me. I still have my Smurfs from when I was 12, um, because they're still a part of me. It's just not productive for me to live as a 12-year-old anymore. It's highly productive sometimes for me to check in with that 12-year-old because there are insights that children have that adults sometimes overlook. Um, but for me, it's been this marvelous journey, not always pretty, not always joyful, but always expansive, um, and always safe, especially in the company of other women who are engaging on similar journeys for themselves. And just learning that, I don't have to lose or get rid of or forget any aspect of myself. I simply need to own it and choose. Am I going to live my life today as a frightened 12-year-old? Am I going to live my life in this moment as an awaken, aware woman who, no, doesn't have all the answers? And like Stella said at the beginning of this conversation, we don't even know where this conversation is going to go necessarily, but we trust in the process and we trust in each other and ourselves to speak what we want to share. So in this moment, I've actually forgotten if there was a question I was answering. But yeah, for me, just engaging in what to me has become the Crohn's conversations um, has opened up that whole new space for me of stepping into myself as I'm emerging, while also embracing all of those parts and experiences of myself that have gotten me to this point.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was incredible because you touched on everything, right? You touched on the conditioning, the cultural conditioning or the programming or however you want to frame it, where we're taught that to be a woman, you shun certain parts of yourself. And you, interestingly, conveniently, as you also pointed out, you shun the parts of yourself that are the most powerful parts of you. So in the year long, we explore what it means to be the wholeness of woman that we are. So that is on a continuum, as we have explored, where it's like the maiden elements of ourselves, the Smurfs behind you, the goddess element of ourselves, and the crone element of ourselves. And all of them interact and intersect in such a way that makes a whole woman. But most of us have been taught to live as cute maidens, be seen and not heard, and ask for permission and do all the things that give your power up to someone outside of you. And then comes the goddess phase where it's all about other people, right? It's like the birthing years of our lives where it's all about how will so-and-so perceive me and what will they think and all these things. And all the while we shun the crone. I mean, we live in a culture where crone is a dirty word, right? Like when I say that word to women, immediately they sort of like lean back and they go, why not wise woman? And I go, precisely because of what just happened here, right? The body vibrates with a deep intuitive knowing because we know that the crone has not been shunned by society, but she has actually reclaimed her power and has chosen to step outside of it and live her life in a meaningful, congruent way. But the rest of us who are not in her, we don't understand her. So thank you for speaking to the paradigm power, right? Because if I don't understand the paradigm of a crone, I continue to believe that I'm the one shunning her, when the truth of it is that she has stepped outside of my paradigm, seen the bigger, larger context within which my life is unfolding. And what she's done is she said, not that. So she has chosen and this looks different for everybody. So I'm curious next to find out what that looks like for you. But for me, what it looks like is that I now, I live on 2 acres of land and I am intentionally living away from the noise and the vibrational frequency of cities, right? I'm intentionally inviting people into my home that are in alignment with with who I am and who I am becoming, right? Not people who are going to come in and tell me how I should, tut tut, right? So for me, reclaiming the power of the crone has meant that I know how to navigate all the noise, all the external chaotic noise of what's unfolding. And I know my own inner truth, and I know my own intuitive impulses to move me in the direction that's meaningful for me. So that's what we explore in this year long. And so I'm curious about thinking, because you've been in 2, right? So like now thinking back, and I know it's a long time, but I do want to contextualize. And of course, you've been in 2-year longs and every other WEL-Systems based conversation, like myself, that you can get your hands on. So why? Because it's a paradigm. So I'm curious about if you can sort of, think back and imagine where you were 2 years ago when you said yes to the initial year long, because it takes commitment to reclaim that power. Who were you then? Like, who did you know yourself to be then? And what do you find has changed for you in the process of the 2 years to where you find yourself today that you can attribute to the experience of having been part of these conversations?
Sure. I remember actually the moment I read your invitation and knew it was a yes before I got to the end of it. That's, and I was having those insights. The more conversations I engaged in over the years, the more clarity I had within in terms of yes or no and being able to feel that. So there was no thought required. I just knew that this was the conversation for me. And I think in part it was the word crone. I did have that visceral body reaction of, ooh, there's something really powerful in this for me. Um, and I think though that I held it as a novelty because there was a part of me and that at that time that loved the thought of being quirky and isolated and and maybe even shunned, being that crazy lady in the rickety little cabin back in the middle of nowhere with, herbs and potions all over her kitchen and yeah, like wildflowers growing like crazy in the yard. And so I sort of held a piece, I held that image of around Crone as in, somebody who could run with hair free and barefoot all year round, and that kind of physical freedom. And I thought, yeah, that's me. I want to do that. And maybe throw in 20 or 30 cats just to be, just to keep the metaphor going. Um, but at the time that I signed up, I was feeling more connected than I had been, but yet still disconnected in ways that I had no words for. Um, and I was hearing over and over, I'm a divine being in the body for the human experience. And logically, I got it, but viscerally, I still wasn't living it. There was still parts of me that were disbelieving of that. I was still running a lot of stories that was keeping me sort of asleep in patterns in certain areas of my life, and I wasn't noticing. Um, and it's been my experience over and over that when you're ready, at least when I'm ready to let go of a pattern, I engage in a conversation, quite often one that evolves over several days, or like the Crone's conversation over a year, because it's that constant check-in, it's that constant building of community, and the constant awareness of everybody in the call that is able to call out places where I would easily lie to myself. And that's something that I can't always do on my own. I can look in the mirror, or I can breathe and descend, and I will receive certain awarenesses from that. But at least for me, I have patterns that are so ingrained. I'm such a good storyteller that I can lie to myself still. And so when on some level I'm ready to have that found out so I can own it for the truth that it is and choose from there, then it's a conversation like Crone's that really was effective for me, because meeting every month and meeting with that same group in that same safe space, um, there's been no other means where I've gotten to know myself so effectively as I'm getting to know other people on their journey too. Um, and the reciprocity that happens in a group like that, where you build the rapport and you build the trust. And at the end, of the year long, you feel connected to this group, whether or not you actually enter another conversation together again. There is a connection made in that part of the journey shared. All of those things, I continue to carry with me. As Stella mentioned, as you mentioned, Stella, I was in two conversations, and there was an overlap there, I think, of a few months when I was so twice a month. I was in a Crone's conversation with two different groups, and so a very different conversation because of the women involved, but yet a similar, I don't want to say end game, because there is no end game to the conversations we hold in the paradigm we live in, but I guess similar intention of knowing ourselves more intimately as crone and goddess and maiden, all interconnected and flowing together. So energetically, I can still feel the power of those conversations. I don't remember a lot of the words, um, but I do know that when I entered that first Crone's conversation, I was still feeling a lot of fear around certain things, especially around what for me manifests as performance anxiety, um, getting things right, not making an idiot of myself in front of other people. Um, Even though I really don't know what being an idiot is, I think it's more just fear of maybe ridicule or indifference, rejection. And I was holding myself back a lot to avoid those fears. So engaging only when I was pretty clear I could please an audience, or I was fairly certain of what the outcome would be. Kind of like I learned this as a journalist, and I understand law students sometimes learn this as well. You never ask a question unless you know what the answer is going to be. And in our paradigm, it is the complete opposite. It is you ask the question because there's an impulse, and you ask the question, and you listen to what comes up from that. But it's meaningful, not necessarily in the answer received, but in the question asked. Um, and so it's things like that that I was learning in the Crohn's conversations that are useful for engagement in any well systems based conversation, or any conversation that feels authentic to to who I am. So yeah, I guess what I'm led to talk about just a bit is the fact that it's, the topic itself, the exploration of the crone is so very powerful in its own right. And the timeline of engaging monthly for 12 consecutive months um, enhances that power because it enables the rapport and the time to go deep on certain issues. There's sometimes a continuation from month to month. Not always. It depends on where the group is and what comes up for conversation. But quite often, especially when we get a few months in, we're all kind of attuned to each other's stories. And if there's stories that are repeating, we know that. And we can deal with the repetition, the context, rather than the actual content, which enhances evolution by leaps and bounds. Um, but it's also just the general ability to have a signal led, body felt conversation, which is so different from, say, 99% of conversations I engage in outside of this paradigm. Um, just the ability to breathe and have that be okay, the ability to say what comes up without fear of any kind of retribution or shame or um, derision or dismissal. Um, Stella, you are a rock star when it comes to facilitating conversations because you miss nothing. And sometimes that's so annoying. I will be honest there. But there's great joy in that annoyance because what I feel is annoyance, underneath it is gratitude. Finally, somebody sees me. Finally, somebody is willing to call stop on my bullshit and pull out what the real problem is. Again, in these areas when I can't always do that for myself. And I wonder sometimes if we're designed to do it all ourselves. The more I engage in these conversations, I believe that we are built somehow to facilitate this reciprocity with each other, being able to see in others what they cannot see in themselves, and vice versa, them being able to see in me what I can't see in myself. Um, because I believe we are wired to be in community. Um, our difficulty, I look, I say out there, but in the world in which I live, most of whom are not aware of the paradigm from which we're living, um, there's an increasing tendency to isolate because people have been hurt so often by relationships. They've been betrayed by others. They've been harmed even by being in relationships with others. Um, and so I'm seeing a world that would rather get a pet than, enter into an intimate relationship with another human. And there's a great question of, maybe humans aren't meant to work together because we always just seem to be fighting and tearing each other down. I'm seeing it as we're totally meant to work together, but we're meant to work together in mindfully chosen communities. And we cannot do that if we are not first and foremost, clear in who we are. And from that, make a mindful choice. It's hard to make a mindful choice when you don't know who you are and you don't know if you are choosing based on who you are or what you've been taught to believe. Um, those are important distinctions to be able to make, at least in my life as I'm creating it now. So, yeah, I guess at the end of the day, the Crohn's conversations, even when there were two a month, that just gave the added impetus to what I was exploring. And I was getting all of those things, from Crohn's itself down to, how to engage in a mindful and authentic conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those things are continuing to percolate, even, now that those engagements for me have wrapped up. I won't say ended because they just keep going in other forms like this one. Um, but yeah, I continue to grow from all that I gained in space and awareness with those conversations.
Thank you, Jennifer. The transcendence of perceived limitations is so critical to the work that I do and to the work that you do, right? Because if we're trapped in the mindset, the paradigm of the box, we think that that's what we are. So there's no space in the Crone's conversation and most, all well systems based conversations that I facilitate and that the women who are current code model coaches facilitate, where they leave space to hide, because the whole point is to emerge, right? The whole point is to reclaim your wholeness and notice that you're actually safe in being who you are. And all the stories that you have around, how you should, or, what's right and what's wrong and what will people think and all that sort of stuff, that becomes a limitation that is only living inside of you. So when you unleash that limitation and you let it sort of move in the body, and, we learn all this stuff of what do you do when all this stuff's in movement in your body. When you know what to do with that, you're no longer afraid of it. And you can now see the quote unquote beast for the terrified being that it is, right? Because it's usually a terrified 4-year-old that's running the show of our lives at, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. So it's the willingness to notice that that beast is not as scary as we initially think, right? And so finding different ways to engage with it so that we emerge is so critical. So I really enjoyed the difference in how we coach through code model coaching that you were speaking to, because it's a body-led experience, right? So we have the information, we have the appeasing of the intellect, because this is evidential. This is not, new agey, like let's sing kumbaya kind of thing. And I'm not making fun of people that sing kumbaya. I probably do. I chant all the time, but like I'm talking about the perceived, like, oh, this is just silliness. It is not. It is rooted in science. It is rooted in women's intuitive knowing, and it is birthed from truth, right? It is birthed from intuitive knowing. So it's like you cannot birth any differently. You cannot plan a birth. I mean, some people try, but how often does a birth actually go the way that you think it should? So, yeah, so thank you for that. And another thing that you spoke to that I really enjoyed was the notion of individuating in community. So there's no, sisterhood here. There's no dogma here. There's no you should here. There's no the right way to do this here. There is, interesting, what's the truth of your experience? Let's explore that so that you can reclaim this layer that's beckoning for you to reclaim. And in the nanosecond that you do, you know yourself differently, and now you engage your world differently, and you create a different reality. because you quite literally have transformed the perceptual filters through which you see the world. So this brings me to the last sort of section of what I want to talk about, and it's the inclusion of, and this happened during the second Crohn's year long, because as you said, no two conversations are the same. So no two monthly conversations are the same, no two weekly emails are the same. It's all dependent on me, my evolution, and the evolution of the group that's involved. So what's of interest to you may not be of interest to the group that was there the first time. So it shifts. So it's the inclusion of the boundless leader self. So how do we, so, and I don't know exactly what my question here is for you, but I want to know, in what ways have you embodied and began to live from on a deeper layer? First of all, what does boundless leader self mean to you? That's a good one.
It is. Um,
And
yeah.
how have you embodied it in the last couple of years?
It definitely feels like I've grown into it.
Mm.
And having engaged with Boundless Leader Self, the audio files sort of separate from the Crohn's experience, I was actually noticing as I was moving through the Crohn's conversations that I had a desire to listen to the Boundless Leader Self audio as I was moving through. And I have a few of my favorite files that are kind of like go-tos when I feel like um, sometimes and I don't know what, if I had words for the feeling, it just, I knew that's what I wanted to listen to. Um, and what that means for me is, yeah, basically, first and foremost, being in charge of what I create in my own life. Um, Standing up and stepping into, this is my life. How do I want it to look today? And letting go of all of those stories that I'm running of, well, yeah, I want to do this, but I promised that. It's Thursday. I do this every Thursday. Being able to mindfully choose that if I want to, but to pause and check in first. Stop with the patterns and stop with for me, what felt like an underlying victimhood thread
Mm.
of, yeah, I can create my life to a certain point, but you know what? I still got to eat. So I still have to, do this chore that I absolutely despise because it'll pay me. And assorted other, which now feels very like twisted stories to keep status quo running rather than face the unknown. And so I think boundless leader self in this moment for me represents that ability to just step into what's next,
Mm.
the unknown. Like this conversation this morning. Let's hit record and see where it takes us. And same thing with every moment of my day. Um, am I where I want to be? Am I going to where I want to go? Um, and owning when sometimes it's a no. And I'm like, fine, I'm here anyway. I choose to be here and own the intelligence in that. It's the noticing. So,
Mm.
as a leader in my life, it's not always about advance, create, look different, see different, do different. It's noticing and choosing. And sometimes that looks like nothing in a sense that I'm not changing this today. Um, but it's the engaging of the mindful choice rather than the running out of habit or what feels to me sometimes like autopilot. And my crone is essential to being a boundless leader. Um, Kids can be in charge for a while. And the goddess certainly has leadership qualities. But the goddess also has other things she's worried about. And it's the crone who can ultimately bring everything together and go, okay, this is what we need. This is what we're doing. It's that voice of authority from experience, and it's that voice of authority from being that compilation of everything I've ever felt, chosen, done, released, all of it. And it's from that very rich blend that that my decisions come from. So that's what that brought up for me.
Hmm. I had to write it down because it was so brilliant. This be the voice of authority in my own life. That was that was incredible for me because it's speaking to an unwillingness to be manipulated, no matter whose voice it's coming from. So the sources you trust, have been taught and conditioned to trust, even though your body is going, right? It's like no other voice will have dominion over my body, over my life, over my creations. Like I am that voice. So thank you for that. That was brilliant. That was really quite brilliant, and it speaks to the unwillingness to settle and to not declare an internal boundary of authenticity. So thank you so much for that, Jennifer. This was really incredible conversation, and I love that. So I would like to end on that.
That sounds perfect.
Any final words for you that you want to conclude this with? I'm really grateful, and I will be using that line. So.
I will just close with the fact that 2 years ago, prior to me entering into the Crohn's conversations, what we just did would have been horribly painful for
Mm,
me. I would have spent probably last night agonizing about how it was going to go. I would have probably had copious numbers of notes. I would have been emailing you frantically, going, Stella, are you going to ask this? Stella, are we going to talk about this? And I will
mm,
admit that I got up this morning and I went, woohoo, I'm going to have a conversation with Stella today. And that was the last I thought of it until
mm,
we sat down and decided to hit record.
mm,
So that ease in being able to do nothing more than show up and speak my truth in the moment um, is priceless.
Wow.
So
Thank
thank you
you.
for that.
Yes. Thank you. That was incredible. Yes. The ease with which we can live our lives is just out of reach, and it's like it's right there and it's possible. So thank you so much for speaking to the reclaimed potential in this case. I really appreciated this, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Mhm. I hope you enjoyed that conversation between Jennifer and I. And if you did, and you're curious about the year-long exploration coming up, it's called New Ways in Chaotic Times, Reclaiming the Power of the Crone. So no matter where you are in your journey, and no matter what fears are coming up, and no matter what stories are coming up, if you are interested and curious about what would your life look like, what would your life look like if you were to embrace the qualities, the energetic qualities of the crone? If you're curious about what that would mean in your life, whether it's terrifying for you or whether it's enlivening and exciting for you, I invite you to just let me know. So send me an email, stella@sparkingthesacred.com, and let me know that you're curious and you're interested. And what we can do is we can set up a complimentary discovery call where you and I will chat and just see where it takes us. The truth of it is that this is a really powerful exploration, and it is a commitment, right? A year-long commitment. And there's a reason for that. The reason being that you don't just wake up to a different way of being by not consistently and continually living the way that you want to be. And discovering how to do that is part of the process, which you cannot just wake up to one morning because that's not how you've been taught to live. So there is a different way to engage your life. The question becomes, are you curious? Are you willing? Because if you're willing, ability develops, and I am more than happy to have a chat with you about that. So just let me know, and off I go to the rest of my day. I hope you have a spectacular day. I'll talk to you later.